Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi, Kruse. Coming up on the show today, the police chief in Portland wants citizens to apparently be blissfully unaware of the sad state of their criminal justice system. Also, we're going to have an update on a story we talked about for weeks on the podcast, and that is the controversy around the placement of sexually violent predators in a community near you. One of those individuals wound up back in court. We're going to talk about that. Later on, we're going to celebrate, celebrate the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, an act that even President Joe Biden wishes had a different name. And then we'll also have an update on the very latest in a potential plea deal in the case of Wendi Traynor, who was murdered in 2017 by her estranged boyfriend. But first, if you have not become an Undivided subscriber already, please do so. You can help support our mission and our movement, give common sense a comeback, help keep us independent, out of the grasp of corporate overlords at undividedpod.com. Nicole just laughs at me as I got to make it compelling, Nicole. What do you want from me? undividedpod.com.
I agree.
Thank you. You know, I got to sell it. If $5 a month doesn't sell it, I got to add a little pizzazz to it.
Yeah.
I'm working on a commercial that's what other things you can buy for $5 a month that are way less cool.
Way less cool.
Way
Lots
less
of way less cool stuff.
Way less cool. All right. I am really torn on this first story. Usually I wouldn't open the show with a story that I don't have a strong opinion on, but sometimes I like to work through these things live on the show. And so this one has to do with what's happening in Portland, which is very similar to what's happening in Seattle, what's happening in San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and that is really a breakdown of the criminal justice system. And you have, elected prosecutors who have their own opinions about what it means to find justice for victims and what they think their duty is in those positions. And in Portland, just like we've experienced in the past in Seattle, thankfully Seattle has a good city attorney right now, but that hasn't always been the case. But in Portland, they have an activist one, and it's been an issue. So Portland police, and this is according to the Oregonian, the Portland police chief is telling officers, sorry, I thought I was reading something else. Portland police chief to city cops, stop telling residents that DA Mike Schmidt won't prosecute crimes. So apparently officers, and not just a one-off, there have been several instances reported of officers telling crime victims like, hey, we're not going to do anything because your case isn't going to be prosecuted by the district attorney anyway. So they're just sort of being blunt. There's probably a little bit of venting associated with that as well. So according to a memo that was obtained by the Oregonian, written by the police chief in Portland, he wrote, many times these people, referring to these crime victims, are supporters of the police, but feel disheartened by their encounter. A common theme is that officers are telling complainants that there is absolutely nothing they can do for them, or that the problem is the result of someone else's decision. What is completely unacceptable is telling a community member that you will not take police action because the district attorney refuses to prosecute cases. This undermines our relationship with criminal justice partners and sends the message to the community that the system is unresponsive to their needs. The police chief went on to say in this memo to his officers, I want to remind you of why you became an officer. You raised your hands and took an oath because you wanted to help people. You joined to make a difference in the Portland community and individuals' lives. So essentially the police chief wants crime victims to take the blue pill instead of the red pill. They want them to be, blissfully unaware of what the eventual result of their case will be. And this is kind of where I'm torn. And Nicole, feel free to jump in, because I understand in part what the chief of police is saying, is that even if you as an officer are deeply frustrated with the district attorney and their charging decisions, do you need to relay that to a crime victim who's dealing with their own issues in the moment? And I don't think it means that you have to lie to them and say, yep, this is going to be, charged. But it also isn't the job of police. These are two separate institutions. Police, they do their job, they investigate crimes, they hand it off to the prosecutor. And if the prosecutor makes the decision not to charge, then that's on the prosecutor. But I feel like if you have police who are not making the decision to even refer a case and do the paperwork, then you don't get to show the breakdown in the system. Then the system, that case never goes to the prosecutor for the prosecutor to be able to reject.
I get the feeling that this is more him saying, don't tell them what's going on and just, do your job, right? But I think that we forget sometimes that the only way to bring change is to let people know why this is happening, right? So if they're sending their cases in, they're doing the job of a police officer, and then it goes nowhere, they don't want the blame. The police officers don't want the blame. So they're saying, I'm a citizen too. I don't want to be blamed for this. Let me tell you why this is happening, right? And so I feel like that's what's going on, whereas the chief is kind of putting blame on them, saying, don't out us to the public, which that's not fair either, because how do you change something if that's the case, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of torn on this, because I understand the frustration of officers. In Seattle for years and years and years, you've had officers be like, why am I going to waste 3 hours of my night writing up a report on this when then City Attorney Pete Holmes is never going to prosecute at that? You know how many times I heard that from a Seattle officer?
Well, and they're short-staffed.
Right,
and
short-staffed.
So if I've heard this from different car break-ins or property theft is what I'm talking about, property crimes or whatever. They're not, police are saying, we're probably not coming. Like, file it online or whatever it is. We're probably not coming because nobody's going to do anything with it eventually or ever anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so I understand them explaining that, why we're not coming, why we're not writing this up, why we're not taking the time to do this, because it won't get taken care of.
But if you're a citizen, for instance, and you have been the victim of, and obviously these are going to be mostly misdemeanor crimes, right? Because I don't think there's any officer who would say, oh, you were the victim of a felony? Well, we're not going to investigate that. These are probably crimes that related to property damage, theft, etc. And I'm trying to put myself in the position of, a crime victim and to say, okay, how would I feel if I'd feel frustrated, right? Even if that officer is telling me the truth. But if I'm really dedicated to having, my case on record and them investigating, I think it's more fair for that person to then harass the prosecutor and say, hey, police did their job. They took my report. They filed a case. Why aren't you doing your job? And police, I think, can even say that and say, hey, we're a separate part of the criminal justice system. There have been some cases like this that haven't been filed, but we're going to do our job for you. We're going to investigate this to the best of our ability. We're going to pass the case on. And what happens from there is up to the prosecuting attorney.
Sure.
So then you're sending the same message, but you're not just being like, hey, sorry, we're not going to do this because it's not, it may or may not get prosecuted down the road.
I guess I'm making the assumption that the officers are making their best judgment calls. And the reason they're telling them is because they don't have time to write a report and then have it go nowhere, or they don't have time to whatever. But I guess I'm just, assuming that the officers are using best judgment and not necessarily saying that to everyone, but saying that to the ones that it's a, reasonable, maybe not excuse, but a reasonable reason that they're not writing a report.
I think and that's the thing is, and that was my first reaction to seeing this headline that the chief's telling cops, don't tell residents that the DA won't prosecute crimes. My first question was, well, is it true?
I know that's
is that the truth though?
Not addressed.
Are they telling the truth? But you're also not expecting these officers to lie to people like, hey, we're going to get you justice. They're not saying that. So I think there's a happy medium. And I think that as an officer, if you are there and you've responded to a crime, I do think you have a responsibility to, if there is a crime and evidence of it, to pass it along. And then you drop that whole caseload of all these cases that officers are like, we've done our job, we've done our job, we've done our job. Why haven't you done your job? And I think that's the job of a union president, to come out like Mike Solon does in Seattle for the police union here and say, hey, our officers are out there busting their you-know-whats, short-staffed, underappreciated, vilified by politicians. They're still doing what they can on behalf of citizens. And then these cases go to die at the city attorney's office or the district attorney's office in Portland. So I got to say, I think I'm slightly on the side of the police chief.
I think we're both on the side of the police chief. However, I don't think this was worded well. And I mean, it wasn't meant for the public, so maybe he's worded other things more delicately to his officers, but I think that's probably where there's some controversy, or what's made this a controversy is that it hasn't been communicated well to the public, but then it wasn't meant for the public.
But I think you can also be, and I don't know what all these individual interactions that Portland police are having with citizens are like, and if it's just some triggered Portlanders who's like, the cops dismissed me or whatever. Probably the same people who supported like police defunding and rioted in Portland, but I digress. But I think that there's also this element of there's many other things that you can help a crime victim with. I've been the victim of crimes. There's other things you can do to help someone in that moment, because being a crime victim sucks, right? It's not just about, hey, are you going to file my case? Is the prosecutor going to charge this? It's also about, comforting them, making sure they realize that they're heard, that they're not alone, helping them through the process, explaining to them where things go from here, and then giving them tips, if something happened to you like a break-in, how you can keep yourself more safe. So I think there's a lot of things officers can help crime victims with, even if the district attorney is an ideologue and doesn't belong in their job. But I'd be curious to hear from you guys, and we'll read some of your comments coming up later in the show. If you're a crime victim, would you rather have the cop just give it to you straight and say, hey, dude, the district attorney's not going to prosecute this case, so do you even want to bother? Or would you rather have them send it up and then take it up with the district attorney if they don't file charges? So I want to hear that from you. Okay, speaking of our absolutely disastrous criminal justice system, we continue to try to raise awareness before a hearing on Friday about the case of Wendi Traynor. Wendi Traynor was just 25 years old when she was murdered in cold blood by her estranged boyfriend at her apartment in Milton back in 2017. And this case, we have a picture of Wendi you can put up. And Wendi, to me, and I think showing her picture and just how young she was and how vibrant she was, and also how small she was, because this guy claimed self-defense, which is absolutely ridiculous. When Joshua Ellis, her estranged boyfriend, first went to trial on this back in 2019. He was convicted of murder in the second degree with a firearm enhancement. And he ends up getting 23 years, which I think is kind of low, but it's what they could give him at the time. He ends up getting off on a technicality. They order a second trial. Now prosecutors want to cut a sweetheart deal with him. He's expected to be in court on Friday, 2 days from now. And the family is saying this isn't right. This isn't what we want. We'd rather him go to trial and get the maximum that they can give him. So Anne Bremner is a Seattle area trial attorney, and she has agreed to work with the family to bring awareness to this case. And so she agreed to join us to talk about also not only what the family is dealing with, but her perspective as an attorney, what's going on here. Anne Bremner, welcome to Undivided.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, how'd you get involved in this case?
Trent, one of the lawyers that used to be in my firm, who's now on the east side at Inslee Best, who's just a fabulous lawyer. This is a paralegal in their law firm, who's the mother of Wendi. And so her name is Juliana Wong. She's been very involved, but she basically said, this is a travesty. This man was sentenced to 23 years in prison based on a jury verdict of guilt. And now the prosecutor wants to turn around and cut that more than in half. And so I was asked to come in and talk to the family about what the rights are under the victims' rights laws and under our Constitution. What can they do to protest? What can they do to have input? So that's why I was brought in. And it's been an interesting journey so far toward justice. We just hope that any judge that hears this doesn't accept this quote unquote plea bargain.
Are you doing it for free?
Yeah.
I feel like you do a lot of stuff like this for free, Anne.
I do. And I've got to stop. It's just like my assistant goes, are you doing this for free again? I'm like, yes. But, it's to have a law degree and be able to use it for good is really a pleasure. So it's something that I'd like to help them with if I can.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that struck me about this case from my perspective, but I'm very curious to hear from your perspective as someone who's been an attorney for such a long time. One of the things is we had in Wendi's aunt, Sherry Jones, and she says the family felt blindsided by this potential plea deal. Is it normal for a family to not be given a heads up about something like that being in the works?
It's a question of timing, Brandi. They have a right to know what this proposed plea bargain is and have a right, at least have their objections noted in front of a judge. The prosecutor has to bring forward their objections. At what point in the process are they to be informed? In my opinion, it's at the beginning, but there's no definitive rule or law on that, but they have to have input at least and note objections once there's a plea agreement that's reached before it's accepted by a judge.
Does that, in your opinion, have any bearing? If the defense and the prosecution has said, yep, we're okay with this, do the family's objections really mean anything?
They do. And we have a constitutional rights part dealing with victims. So it's like victims' rights should be similar to defendants' rights. That was the whole movement. Like all the defendants have all the rights. Victims don't have any rights. And when I say victims, I mean victim families too. So that should have an input. The Epstein case had some of this. I don't know if you remember, but there were victims in Florida who raised an issue and almost went to the Supreme Court, but it was deemed to be moot once he died. But saying we didn't have input when you reached a plea agreement. Remember all that with Epstein in Florida before the Southern District federal charges came down. So that's a great example of the court saying, you're right. You do have standing. You had a right to have input, and that was ignored.
Again, from the perspective of an attorney, if you were the prosecutor in this case, I guess, is there anything about the case against Joshua Ellis that would inherently warrant a plea deal? Is there a weakness or something where it would be too risky to go to trial again?
That's the huge question. I mean, that's a brilliant question because I don't see anything. I mean, maybe there's something in the file I'm not aware of. It was tried once. He testified. He admitted to shooting her. He tried to claim self-defense, but he said he would have shot her anyway. So there's no, fatal flaws, so to speak, in the anticipated proof in the case. There was a reversal based upon comments made in voir dire, jury selection, but that shouldn't impact this case at all. It's a clean slate. So there has been some rumor that the prosecutors have said it's hard in this environment to get convictions, but that's all I've heard.
And do you mean, I'm just going to be blunt, do you mean because of the races of the people involved?
Potentially, but also the whole issue of police accountability, defund the police when you have police testifying, whether or not they're believed. But I look at Sheriff Troyer, who was my client, and he was believed, he testified, and he was acquitted by a great jury down in Pierce County. So I don't know that I agree with that, but again, I don't practice on a regular basis in Pierce County.
Yeah, it just seems like there's something exceptional here. I mean, here we have what I believe is really a victim of domestic violence, stalked across the country by her estranged boyfriend, shot point blank in the head.
Back of the head.
In the back of the head, left for dead. He allegedly, according to some neighbors, is still visiting the apartment while her body is there decomposing. I mean, so just some egregious elements to this crime. So I guess I'm baffled at the concept of a deal that lets him walk out of prison by 2025.
Yeah, well, we really want to thank you for showcasing this, Brandi. I mean, you're wonderful. And I think I agree with everything you just said. It's not only that, as I understand it, he went out for dinner that night, after he shot her in the back of the head. And he claimed self-defense. How do you claim self-defense when you have you shoot someone in the back of the head? I don't want to taint any potential proceedings or his trial. I mean, ethically, I can't do that, but I can say that I don't see anything in this case that mitigates to the extent that they should offer such a light sentence.
So do you have any hope that between now and Friday, there's going to be some sort of come to Jesus by the prosecution to say, okay, let's not go in this direction? Is that even possible at this point?
Sure, it's possible. I mean, they've reached an agreement with the defense, and it's, I believe, to be in writing. Usually those types of documents, you have to have something reduced to writing when you have a plea agreement. I know that some people have reached out to Mary Robnett, the elected prosecutor, and I don't know if there would be any change of heart, but I would hope so. I mean, the path of the law has been reason, right? And you just have to be reasonable in all respects, all parties to this case. And I think if people are reasonable, then it should at least be looked at again and anew.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that some people have reached out to the elected prosecutor, and I actually could use your advice on this, and I think our viewers and our listeners could use your advice because, sometimes we have this call to action, like what can people do who are angry or frustrated by this? To me, it's a little more delicate when you have an ongoing criminal proceeding. I don't want people harassing the judge. I don't want anyone to feel pressure to harass. So is there anything that is appropriate and reasonable that especially citizens of Pierce County can do to voice their opposition to this?
Well, I think it's important to have folks write to the prosecutor or email, voice their concerns. Of course, we don't want to ever have, harassment. And we want to be mindful of the fact that this individual, Mr. Ellis, has a right to a fair trial. That this should not be, his proceedings shouldn't be tainted. What if it does go to trial? What if this does fall apart? I don't want to be a part of it. Nobody wants to be a part of any kind of effort that might jeopardize his rights to a fair and impartial jury and a fair trial. But that having been said, people can certainly say, we understand there's this plea agreement in the works. We'd like to voice our concerns that this is too lenient of a sentence. And we're members of the public. We're part of your jurisdiction, to the prosecutor, and to be basically voicing concerns and also asking if there's anything else that they're not aware of. Because, I mean, maybe there's something I'm not aware of, Brandi. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something that really drove this agreement that I haven't been informed about. But right now, I'm just not aware of anything like that.
Yeah, and us either. I mean, we've emailed the prosecutor's office and they've been pretty close to the vest about this decision making. And I understand that to a certain extent, but we're kind of left just to wonder and even guess, okay, what might be going on here? And let's end with this, just from a broader perspective. You referenced it earlier, but I hear increasing frustration from victims, from families about the state of the criminal justice system, about how they really feel like justice isn't being prioritized. And in a lot of cases, it's almost like criminals not necessarily have more rights, but there's more leniency for them. And it's frustrating for a lot of folks. Are you, from your whole legal career, and you've been in the Seattle area for a long time, are you sensing that as well?
I am, and I've taken a couple of cases over the years where victims and victims' families didn't get redress in the criminal justice system, and so we actually had to go route of a civil case. Take the deposition of the person that's the suspect. I mean, to basically ferret out what the facts are outside of the criminal justice system. It is really frustrating. To not have a voice or have to hire a lawyer, even if it's for free, to have a voice. It's just, I think, frustrating for families. And I did get a few emails from people saying, how come he has all these rights? We don't, or the family doesn't. And I think that we just have to be vigilant as lawyers in enforcing victims' rights, like in the Epstein case. I mean, those rights were recognized. It doesn't happen very often in terms of like published decisions or noteworthy high-profile cases where victims are heard and they say, we didn't agree to his getting, what was it, a year or something that he got in Florida, and then he could have work release or something, or maybe it was a couple of years, but it was pretty lenient for what was involved.
Yeah, it's not right. It shouldn't be that way. Well, Anne Bremner, thank you so much. And thank you for helping give Wendi Traynor's family a voice. I know that they are so appreciative of what you're doing for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate Anne Bremner coming on and obviously lending her expertise to help give Wendi Traynor's family a voice when they feel completely voiceless through this process. So here's what we're going to do based on that conversation with Anne. And again, I think there's a lot of times that we urge you guys to take action, and I think it's been effective in the past. My hesitancy with, for instance, emailing the judge or emailing the prosecutor who's actually trying the case is I don't want it to come across as intimidation, as much as I know that you guys always keep your emails civil. So what we do think is a better thing is to email the politician. I mean, it is an elected prosecutor, Mary Robnett, in Pierce County, and especially if you're a Pierce County resident, you have every right in the world to take issue with something that her office is doing that erodes public safety. So in the comments of the show on YouTube, Facebook, Patreon, Locals, we will be posting a direct link so you can fill out a form that gets sent to the prosecutor's office. It is our understanding that they do receive them directly. It's because Nicole, actually, that's how she ended up trying to reach out to them to get comments on this case, and they responded right away. So I think this is a good way. Keep them civil, but obviously, if you feel compelled, express your disappointment with the fact that Joshua Ellis, given that there is ample evidence that he murdered his estranged girlfriend in cold blood. I mean, we're talking about domestic violence here. I thought that mattered to people in the Wendi Traynor case. Just express how you feel about him potentially getting this plea deal and being out by 2025. So we're going to post that in the comments, so be on the lookout for that. But tomorrow on the show, Nicole, we're going to have Mark Lindquist, correct? The former elected Pierce County prosecutor. And why it's important to have him on is not to talk crap about the current prosecutor or anything like that, but we want to know the decision-making that went into, one, not charging Joshua Ellis with murder in the first degree and how legally they didn't think it met that threshold, but also sort of what happened with the initial trial falling apart and being reversed on appeal. So we're not letting this case go. The court hearing, our understanding, is still happening early Friday afternoon. So we're going to continue to follow it. All right, coming up next, the police chief, I already talked about that. Sorry, I'm lost today. Coming up next, an update on the controversy around the worst of the worst sexual predators being placed in less secure community facilities. One of them that we talked about quite a bit on the show, he was in court this morning. So we're going to talk about all the updates that led to it. But first, we've been talking about our friend Wes Jones, a wonderful real estate agent in our area, who he and his team, they offer something called the Listing Boost Concierge Service. We've been talking about it on the show a lot. Essentially, if you're trying to sell your home, you know it needs some updates, they'll go in, they'll take care of all it for you. You don't even have to pay for it until closing. And so we ended up speaking with Susan in Federal Way, who called Wes Jones, ended up taking advantage of the Listing Boost concierge service because she desperately needed help with a home she was trying to sell after she'd lived there for 25 years.
I knew I had to paint. I knew I needed to get new flooring. I needed to get new lighting. I told him up front that I was very interested, that I did not have the time or the finances to do what needed to be done. And he immediately jumped in with, well, I do. Work started immediately. And I would say in 2 to 3 weeks, they had landscaping done. They had all the painting done. The new floors were put in. All the lighting was put in. It just was all so fast. And the rest is history. It was on the market for 7 days. I was able to get well over listing price.
To be specific, Susan got 20 offers, sold it for 15% over list price, and ended up getting $200,000 more than an investor offered her before the renovations. How cool is that? I love hearing success stories of people who've done business with our sponsors and had wonderful experiences like Susan. So really good program. But just start by going to sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com. In the very early stages, they have a simple home value calculator you can use on their website that'll tell you how much your home is worth. If you're thinking about selling it, it might be worth more than you think. So sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, we have an update on the controversy in our state around sexually violent predators, the worst of the worst, people who are so bad that they had to be put on an island so they could be kept away from the general population. An update on the controversy around them being placed in less than secure facilities in a neighborhood near you. Let's get to it in our segment, Unbelievable. So for, I would say, a month or more on the podcast this last spring, we talked about the case of Stephen Knapp, who is a pedophile, a level 3 sex offender who had been residing on McNeil Island, where the worst of the worst sex offenders go, people who are deemed irredeemable under the law, essentially, about the fact that he was one of the sex offenders who was able to successfully petition to be placed in a less restrictive setting in a community. And that community happened to be Enumclaw. And I think it goes without saying that the people of Enumclaw weren't very happy about it, understandably so. His crimes involved children. He was placed in a house that was really close to a school bus stop. Really ridiculous stuff. And the community got virtually no notification. But there's been some updates in Stephen's case, one of them being that he ended up being sent back to McNeil Island because he violated the conditions of his release to that less secure facility. So this actually happened, I think, a couple weeks ago, and we were sort of monitoring it. Our friend Ori Hoffman put out a piece on it. Ori Hoffman, his headlines are always so so vibrant. He said, convicted sex offender sent back to Seattle area Pedo Island after removal from halfway house for parole violations. So he didn't reoffend. I want to be very clear, at least that they know of. He did not reoffend, but he violated some very basic conditions of his release. For instance, he was found to have a weapon, and it wasn't a gun, but it was like a dowel. He'd sharpened into a dagger or something, and his excuse was, hey, I don't feel safe, because he claims that people in the community in Enumclaw have thrown stuff at the house, driven by and made loud noises intentionally, and he doesn't feel safe. So he sharpened this dowel into a point, which, okay, first of all, I don't have to tell you the ridiculousness of a pedophile saying that he doesn't feel safe. However, this was a condition of his release that he violated. And in addition to that, it was found that he had had contact or been in contact with another person who was released from McNeil Island. And that was also in violation of a condition of his release. So Stephen Knapp, this already just worst of the worst when it comes to sex offenders, who people in Enumclaw said, we don't want him here anyway. He gets sent back to McNeil Island, which I was like, good, that's where he belongs, given what he's done. But Ori Hoffman had an update this morning, and we just wanted to make you aware of it because we're continuing to monitor it. Stephen Knapp was back in court this morning in a King County Superior Court to petition to be sent back to a less restrictive setting. And we are in touch with someone who's been in the courtroom today. We're waiting for updates. Because they didn't offer a streaming option, and obviously we're here. So we wanted to put a pin in that and then hopefully have an update for you tomorrow. But I think it would be pretty absurd if you have this guy who arguably should never have been let off this island in the first place. I mean, he had a long history of seeking out particularly young women to victimize, and then he had at multiple occasions undergone these reviews where it was found that he just was irredeemable, that he would continue to do these things, and somehow he was able to successfully petition a court to let him go into a community setting near a school bus stop. I mean, this is really weird stuff. And as I said at the time when we were debating all of this just defies common sense. It is wholly unbelievable. And then he shows that he can't even be trusted to follow very simple rules related to his release, like not having a weapon. You've sharpened a stick to a point. And look, do I believe that he's probably feels a little harassed in Enumclaw? Hell yeah, I do. I've met the people in Enumclaw. They don't want him there. I hope nobody hurts him, obviously. But I mean, again, I go back to the guy preyed on young girls, so I guess I'm not particularly concerned about his sense of safety and security. However, wasn't supposed to have it, wasn't supposed to communicate with another sex offender, and he did. So if he can't even be trusted to follow simple conditions of his release, then he absolutely should not be allowed to go back to Enumclaw. That would be absurd. Wouldn't be shocking. Wouldn't be shocking given our criminal justice system and the theme of today's episode so far. But it would be incredibly disappointing, and I think just indicative of a system that prioritizes the rights of offenders, even the worst offenders, even people who prey on children, over the rights of law-abiding citizens to feel safe and to feel secure in their homes and in their neighborhoods. So we're going to put a pin in that as we wait for updates on what happened in court and whether Stephen Knapp is going to be allowed once again to get off, as Ari Hoffman calls it, Pedo Island. Pedo Island?
I was going to say, I would say maybe pedo island.
I guess you're right. It's pedophile. So
right.
Pedo Island. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I've been saying a lot of things wrong lately. What did I say wrong yesterday?
Oh, Nordstrom's.
Oh, I thought it was Nordstrom's my whole life. I can't be the only one. Nordstrom. My bad. For as much money as I've spent at Nordstrom, I have to know how to say it. Anyway, okay, coming up next, we found out who might be running Joe Biden's Twitter account. But first, I want to tell you about my experience with First Mark Insurance. Mike and I took the First Mark Challenge, as you know, back in the spring. We have loved it. We love, first of all, feeling like we have this exclusive insurance service, like we feel like real, like rich adults or something. When in reality, First Mark Insurance doesn't cost a thing. It doesn't cost you a thing. Mike and I, when we did the First Mark Challenge, we talked to them about our insurance needs, our current insurance. They went out, they shop all the carriers for you for free, and then they come back and they make recommendations to you. And I've heard from so many people who are saving hundreds of dollars a month on their insurance, and they've got just as good of insurance as they had before, if not better. Here's Dave Taylor. He's the CEO of First Mark.
We believe and we say that we will help 100% of the people that we work with. Okay. Now that doesn't mean necessarily that 100% of the people we work with are going to become First Mark clients, but we believe that we will actually help 100% of the people, whether that be stay with your current carrier, but let's modify your coverage a bit so you're better protected, or ultimately, hopefully come over to First Mark. We're going to put you with a different company and give you better coverage, right? So the challenge is really challenging individuals to give us an opportunity to prove that to them. That's really what the First Mark Challenge is.
And as he said there, and I think that's important, is you can take the First Mark Challenge and then just say, never mind, I'm going to keep what I already have. And the only thing you've lost is a little bit of time that you invested into talking to them. It doesn't cost you anything to do it. Or more likely, they come back to you and say, hey, we can get you better insurance, we can get you a better price, and you're going to have better service through us, First Mark, because you call them whenever you have an incident or want to file a claim. You don't have to go through your big insurance carrier and get stuck in some phone tree. You call your person at First Mark and be like, hey, crash my car or whatever it is, and they're going to take care of you. It's really, really an awesome service, and you could save money, which I think is great. FirstMarkInsurance.com, FirstMarkInsurance.com. They work for you. Nicole's like, you can't make the commercial so long, but I like our sponsors, Nicole. I like our sponsors, and I love our sponsors. I love our sponsors, and First Mark is really cool. I just think it's great. And like I said, Mike and I feel like...
you feel fancy.
We feel fancy because we feel like we are millionaires who have some insurance agent that is just for us, and we're like, oh, hello. So anyway, I digress. I'm easily impressed, obviously, but okay. Nicole put this story in the rundown. It's fine. It's fine. I just think it's more funny than anything. I think that people who are like losing it over it, and I'm like, okay, it's not surprising.
Well, you just happened to talk about this earlier
We
in the
did.
week.
So Nicole said like
Perfect.
she would never tweet for someone, right? Like she'd
As
never
someone.
tweet as someone. Like, hey, Brandi Kruse here, da da da. She would just say, hey, this is Nicole for Brandi Kruse tweeting this out. So
Or
anyway,
you just like leave that part of it out.
right.
So you just make a statement, doesn't say who it's from, right?
Yeah, but if you tweet that from someone's account,
Correct.
aren't people like that?
Well,
The
there's a difference
assumption
from
would be that's
a
from their
show
account.
or from a person's account. So
Gotcha.
yes.
Okay. So anyway, Karine Jean-Pierre, a tweet popped up on her, the White House press secretary. A tweet popped up on her, on her X thread. I cannot stop saying tweet. I'm not going to. You know what? It's just easier for me. And it read, investing in America means investing in all of America. When I ran for president, I made a promise that I would leave no part of the country behind. So this tells me, I mean, I'm guessing that she often tweets for the president, which this is the thing. I'm not triggered by this. I don't think it's something worthy of like, I think it's funny. I don't think it's worthy of making, I can see how this
sure.
mistake happens easily. I'm assuming she has her little thing where it's a drop down menu and sometimes she tweets for the president. And then she accidentally tweeted for the president as herself. So
Although
it's more funny than anything.
I think it is concerning that there's not this is the president speaking. We take this as the president speaking these days. We go to Twitter a lot. And I think that there should be a check and double check.
Well, I think it just speaks to
Right?
the fact that, as we'll find out in our closing sanity check today, Karine Jean-Pierre is just woefully unqualified for her job. I mean, she's terrible at it. And
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe this is, let me be clear, this could actually be a third party that tweets for all of them.
Right,
So
and-
it doesn't necessarily mean it was Karine Jean-Pierre.
That's also a frustration, I think, because like we were talking about the Hawaii, the Maui fires and the only response being given from his Twitter. And
Right.
so if that's going to be your response, then at least let us think you're doing it or
Yeah.
you're involved with it. But this is obviously saying, nope, he's not really involved
Well,
with it.
do you really think he is? Does
No,
anyone
I know
really
he's
think
not, but
Biden's
that's why
like,
he should be out saying, I support my blah, blah, blah intel. I mean, I know he's going there next week now, but that's after the no comment. That's after not saying anything for a week. That's, if you're going to treat Twitter or X like your mouthpiece, then you
Right.
better own it.
Well, you better at least double check, like, hey, is this coming out from the right account? However, we were actually discussing this the other day. I kind of miss when these were the stories that were like controversy, So you remember when President Biden tweeted out like Kofifi, like it was something Kofifi, and it almost seemed like he was writing like coverage and then fell asleep and just trailed off. And I remember that being like a big story, like what did the president mean? What
it was huge.
Is he capable of doing the job? But I kind of miss like fun controversies. I was just thinking about this with Seattle, like besides like Ed Murray and the accusations that faced him. I look back at some of the stories that we do on Seattle in my early days of my career, and I'd be like, those wouldn't even make the news now. There's so much more serious stuff and depressing stuff going on.
It's true.
So it's okay to have a little fun with Karine Jean-Pierre. There was a lot of people on Twitter who had fun with her. Wrong account, boo, was one of the retweets to her message. Joe Concho at Fox said, "Welp, I guess we know who's been writing President Biden's tweets for him. A, Karine Jean-Pierre, not good. B, White House intern, also not good. Or C, the person who left cocaine in the White House. Really not good." Hey, they won't tell us who it was, so I guess there is still a possibility that the cocaine snorter.
Well, I guess either would work.
I've never done it. It's not clear.
We're not really good at the drug lingo.
If maybe the cocaine snorter was on the wrong Twitter account. Who knows?
I thought you were going to say it was Karine.
It was what? No, I'm not saying it was Karine. Half absolutely not saying it was Corinne Jean-Pierre. However, I don't know who it was, so the options are endless.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to your questions and comments. We had a lot of comments from you guys on the Portland police story, and if as a crime victim, you'd rather be blissfully unaware of where your case is going to end up, or if you just want an officer to shoot it straight to you, so you're not wasting your time. But first, I've been talking about my success on the East Side Weight Loss Clinic plan. I love having a friend now on the program. I have a friend who started the program a few days ago, and we've been texting back and forth, like, oh, what are you cooking up today? She was sending me her coffee brew that's on the program, like that she made, and I was like, that looks good. It's nice when you have a little support. In fact, people I've heard from on the program who do the best are people, Ben and Leslie, the couple who we've met, they've both done awesome. I like the program because I just need structure. Like, look, if I could have lost the weight by myself, I would have done it, but I need structure. I need someone to say, here's what to do, here's what not to do. And it's not a lifelong diet. 60 days, I lost more than 30 pounds in 60 days. And then they teach you how to keep it off for life without feeling like you're just miserable every day and you can't eat anything. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com, EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. Schedule a free 15-minute consultation. You can also call their office, 425-354-3020. Okay, let's get to questions and comments. Like I said, a lot of comments on the Portland police story. Bill Biz, our YouTube sugar daddy with a $20 super chat. He says, the Portland police chief is certainly gaslighting. Without consequences, public order breaks down. He should be applying pressure to prosecutors. The broken window theory also applies to minor crimes. And you would hope, we don't know whether behind the scenes the police chief has been applying pressure to prosecutors, but you would hope that he's being equally as critical of the prosecutor as he is of his own officers, if he is a true leader. Many of you said that you don't agree with my opinion on it. I was of the opinion, although it wasn't like I struggle with it a little bit, I was of the opinion that even if officers believe that a crime is not going to be prosecuted, that there are still ways that they can do their jobs, send it off to prosecutors, and then let prosecutors bear the burden of being the place where that case dies and having to live with that. Tina said, I don't agree with Brandi. Mugshot Espresso says, I don't agree, Brandi. The fact of the matter is these victims should understand the system is failing them. I agree. I think there's a way to do both. And I think part of getting them to understand that the system is failing them is letting them know that that breakdown is not going to happen with the police. That breakdown is going to happen down the street at the prosecutor's office. And I thought Lynn on Patreon made a really good point. She said the problem with not having a case file in there is there's no data to back up how many crimes have been committed, which can then be further broken down on which crimes were not prosecuted, and then you can understand or go to the prosecutor from there. And I tend to agree with that. It's like, and this is like when people are like, oh, crime is down in Seattle. Car prowls are down, theft is down. It's like, that's because people aren't even reporting it. So there's multiple places where the system can break down. I think there's a lot of breakdown in people being so fed up that they don't even call 911 because they're like, they're not going to come anyway. If they do come, it's going to be 8 hours from now and it's not going to make a lick of a difference. Then my case isn't going to go anywhere. So I actually think that's happening more often than police saying, hey, this case isn't going to go anywhere after they already respond. So something to consider. Let's see here. Todd Welch said, I agree with the Portland police chief's position. It is not the job of rank and file to interject to a victim. They don't know what case a prosecutor will or will not take. And I think that there was one, let me see if I can find. Yeah, Matthew Cook had kind of a retort to that mindset. He said if there are specific offenses that they know the Multnomah County DA has said he won't charge, and my understanding is he's been pretty vocal about what he won't charge, then I say pass that along. And I think that's different. If you have a DA who says, I'm not taking drug possession cases, then I think it's fine for police to say, hey, the prosecutor has said that he's not going to file these cases. I think that's different. But I think if you're a police officer just saying, we don't think that they're going to file this because in other instances they haven't. So I think there is a little bit of a room there for an officer to use their judgment, as Nicole was saying earlier. Let's see. Devlin says, Chief Lovell sounds like a coward. You're asking officers to risk their life, limb, or freedom to make an arrest they know will not be prosecuted. Vicky says, my son-in-law caught a guy who'd broken into their condo garage. He called 911, followed the guy at a distance on video, and when SPD finally showed up, the guy was long gone. Yeah, I hear a lot of stories like that. I don't blame the cops for that, though. I blame the fact that we're 600 officers down because politicians in Seattle vilified them for so long. All right, on the Wendi Traynor case, Charlie says there seems to be more advocates out there for the criminals rather than the victims of crimes. I tend to agree, and unfortunately, a lot of those advocates for the criminals happen to be politicians in our state. who are supposed to be public servants. Jill says, will we be able to get the name of the judge that will decide the case? I think after the hearing on Friday. And again, we're providing that link to you. I think we've already posted it. I already posted it on YouTube. Yeah, and the Facebook stream. And then I'm going to go and post it on Patreon and Locals as well. Did I post it? Okay. Yes, I did. I posted it on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll get it up on Locals and Patreon as well. I just think that I don't want people harassing the judge. Not that you guys would, but I think that a judge might take it a certain way or feel like it's undue pressure. So I just want that whole situation to be, kosher. And so I think emailing the elected prosecutor is a much different thing. This is someone who people in Pierce County voted into office. And as I said, they have every right in the world to tell her whether they think her office is doing a good job. But yes, I think on Monday's show, we'll let you guys all know how the hearing on Friday went. And if you're subscribers, we'll certainly update you on the Sunday show as well. But we might know, on Friday. Okay. All right. Chris says, obviously American courts are bit by bit stripping away women's rights, even if they are murdered. Women's rights mean nothing to those in power. Will burqas be mandatory for women soon? I don't think burqas will be, but I agree with you that it's a declining period for women. It's very strange. And I mean, how many times do we preach helping victims of domestic violence? And we talked on the show yesterday about gun violence and gun control that Democrats prioritize. And then you've got a guy who shot his ex-girlfriend in the back of the head and left her for dead, and they're going to get rid of his mandatory firearm enhancement? In what universe does that make sense? I think that's another thing to bring up with the elected prosecutor is, do you care about gun crimes or not? Because this guy in his original sentence got 60 months tacked on for using a firearm in the commission of a felony. And that shows offenders, if you stick by that, hey, you use a gun to hurt someone, you use a gun illegally, we're going to throw the freaking book at you. And if you really care about gun crimes and gun violence, you should be throwing the book at every single person who uses a gun in the commission of a crime, or I don't want to hear jack from you about gun control. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay, great questions and comments today. The results of my poll, I said, if you were a crime victim, would you want police to be honest about the likelihood of charges? 96% said yes, 4% said no. Okay, how about it, Nicole? Shall we get to our closing sanity, or rather insanity check? Go ahead. I don't know if you guys knew this, but today is a huge day. Huge, big day. It is the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. You gotta turn your mic on so people can really...
Well, I know.
That's not a very enthusiastic... Oh yeah, hit it. Oh,
no.
Oh no.
No.
That's the laughter. Daryl, hit the green one. Oh, that's better. Hold that. Wait for it. It's the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, that's an even better one. So anyway, there's a couple things that are I'm laughing about this because it's so absurd. So the Inflation Reduction Act has not brought down inflation. Inflation has dipped a little bit since last year, but even mainstream media outlets and mainstream economists say that's not because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So here's the article. Well, actually, first of all, Karine Jean-Pierre talked about this a little bit ago. Okay. Karine Jean-Pierre brought this up, of course, at her White House press briefing. Let's see what she had to say.
As you all know, today is the first anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Most 1-year-olds can barely walk. But this 1-year-old is up and running. I couldn't help myself, sorry. Up and running. So that's very excited. We're very excited about the Inflation Reduction Act and everything that it's doing.
I love how nobody laughs at her joke. And later on, she actually came back and said, nobody's going to laugh at my 1-year-old joke. And then somebody giggles in pity. I was like, oh gosh. So anyway, the Inflation Reduction Act has not actually reduced inflation. And this is not me saying this. For instance, here's the article from the Associated Press, which I would argue is a liberal-leaning news publication. Yes, inflation is down. No, the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't deserve the credit. And in it, they quote 2 economists. One is Harvard University economist Jason Furman, who said, I can't think of any mechanism by which it would have brought down inflation to date. The other one is Alex Arnon. He's an economic and budget analyst for University of Pennsylvania's Penn Wharton budget model. He said, we can say with pretty strong confidence that it was most other factors that have brought inflation down. The IRA has just not been a significant factor. And in case you think the Associated Press is lying to you, in case you think those economists are lying to you, Joe Biden said basically the same thing. In fact, at a fundraiser just a few days ago, he said, quote, I wish I hadn't called it that because it has less to do with reducing inflation than it has to do with providing alternatives that generate economic growth. So there you have it. Even the president says that he wishes he hadn't called the IRA the Inflation Reduction Act. However, it is not just Karine Jean-Pierre, it is not just the president, it is not just us here on Undivided who are celebrating 1 year of the historic Inflation Reduction Act. It is, of course, our Vice President Kamala Harris, who made a stop in the Seattle area yesterday, and she talked about this. Our governor, Jay Inslee, was there. He said, welcome back, VP. We're honored to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the most historic and substantive federal actions energizing Washington state and the nation in the fight against climate change. You notice how even Jay Inslee's like, yeah, it's not about reducing inflation. It's about climate change or whatever it is. And then he goes on to say, and this one really is where the sanity check comes into play today. He said, this law also helps reduce costs for families, from energy bills to medication. Interesting on reducing costs for families because Washington continues to have one of the highest gas rates in the nation. Notice I did say I'll have to give Inslee credit. It's not. California is the highest once again. Not by much, but it is. But Washington State still right up there. So I just find it funny how Governor Jay Inslee's like, hey, let's celebrate the fact that maybe this Inflation Reduction Act, which shouldn't be named that at all, according to the person who created it, maybe one day it might help bring down costs for American families, and we should celebrate that. Well, at the same time, I've supported policies that have skyrocketed costs for Washington families. Something tells me that Jay Inslee doesn't actually care about how much money government policies cost you. That has been your sanity check for today, and that has been today's episode of Undivided. Remember, if you feel so inclined, we're going to offer a link for you to reach out to the elected prosecutor in Pierce County to politely state your concerns, if you have them, with the plea deal being floated in the Joshua Ellis case. We have just a few days to really, hopefully, make them have a come to Jesus moment. So please do that if you feel so inclined. In the meantime, we will see you back here on the live show tomorrow at noon. If you've not become an Undivided subscriber already, do so. It's so easy. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. You can become a subscriber and support our show for $5 a month. I'll see you back here tomorrow.